I don't know, Bob and I have known each other. I've known Bob for probably 25 years or better, and been with him in Minnesota and Santa Fe, and we were at his 50th in Las Vegas, and he is respected and revered and loved all over the world, literally. And I mean, I think that's why we have over 100 people here tonight, Bob. But without further ado, take it away. It's yours, Bob.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Bob. I'm an alcoholic. Sober through the grace of God and AA since the 10th of December, 1967. For that, I'm very grateful. So I just celebrated my AA birthday. I'm 55 years sober. I also, a week before that, my wife and I celebrated our 55th wedding anniversary. So I'm 55 years married. And that's as big a miracle in many ways as my sobriety is. I want to read two things to follow. When did Bill write that thing on emotional sobriety? In the late 60s?
1958.
1958, okay. So there's a book that Mel Barker wrote called My Search for Bill W. And in the book, he talks about when he was a relatively new member of AA, he went and saw Bill a couple of times. And he wrote Bill a letter in 1952, and he wanted to know two things. Why he wanted to know about Bill's hot flash spiritual awakening, and he wanted to know about why the 12 and 12 didn't seem as positive as the big book. And I'm going to condense what Bill said about his spiritual awakening. He said, everybody talks about it as it's kind of a special thing. And of course it is special. But he said, if you would take all the cumulative spiritual experiences that all of you have had in Alcoholics Anonymous and compress them into 6 minutes, you too would see the sun and the stars. And I thought that was a stunning summary for most of us. If you would take the spiritual insights that most of us have had and compress them into a relatively short period of time, that would seem as profound an experience as it could possibly be. Also, so Bill is writing this letter to a newcomer. It's a 5-page letter. And so he goes, so towards the end of the letter, he says, on a further point with me, originally, my experience was, his spiritual experience was so profound. The preview of destiny so intense that I never have had difficulty with doubts since that time. Even at my worst, and that's been damn bad at times, the sense of the presence of God has never deserted me. That has pulled me through some awful jam. The doubts about myself as an ongoing human concern never has seemed to have been the question about my ultimate destiny of us all, or God's justice and love. Long ago, I became a pupil of AA. This is our founder talking. A pupil of AA. All around me, people were doing better with themselves in a spiritual sense than I ever could. In my role as Mr. AA, I've been enabled to manage fairly well. But as one neurotic drunk trying to get along and grow, I often have been pathetically rebellious and rational. Practically all the sins I didn't have time for when drinking, I've since fallen for in the last 12 years of life. Despite all my blessings and opportunities, I spent 8 years in depression, sometimes very severe ones. However, there's been a profit for AA, even in that state of affairs. The depression kept me off the road. He only talked at the founders group for quite a few years. And for making speeches. In fact, I was forced to sit home and ask what would become of AA and what would become of me, the result of which were the 12 traditions, not a bad contributions, of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the present world service structure. So he said, maybe I grew up a little and grew up a little myself also. At any rate, I sure hope so. Dr. Bob was made of better stuff. In his personal life, he always came much closer to spiritual achievement than I ever did. He seemed never to have been victimized by awful conflicts, though that's not for sure because he was a real stoic. Unlike me, he was a vast reader of spiritual psychic literature. He had a great library of it, and I went through that library with his daughter. By contrast, my own reading has been very sparse. I have rather relied more on observation and conversation. I guess I'm still a shopper at the theological pie counter, still wondering in many respects, what's it all about? So, my friend, you now have the latest bulletin on my state of grace. I do hope it helps reduce any sense of overestimate that you must have about me. I do hope so. For another thing, the really impossible, that someday this society will let me be just a plain member. Devotedly, Bill Wilson. He had a, I just love him as a writer, and he had a sense of humility. We joke about Bill's being the flim flam sales guy and so forth, and Dr. Bob being the stoic. Bill Wilson was perfectly suited to be the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we are so blessed that he authored, that the big book came through him. I think came through him from God. And what an extraordinary, that today that most of us are still devoted to the big book, 80 years or whatever it is after, since 1939. I guess that's 73 years. That's just extraordinary. I get an impression that I'm supposed to kind of talk about what's happened to me in sobriety. I don't know how long this conversation will last or how long it'll take. And I hope we can get Sam back on, because he said if I come up short, that he would interview me.
He's
3
coming in.
weeks ago.
He's
Pardon
coming
me?
in, Bob.
Oh, okay.
All right,
I don't
Pastor.
like him personally, but I think it would help the interview process to be able to do that. So about 9 months ago, I was talking to one of my sponsees, and I said, I want to go back to Notre Dame. I haven't been to campus in 30 years, and there's 40 years I'd like to go back and do that. And little did I know that about 3 months later, I got an invitation to go talk at Mishawaka, which is the neighboring town to South Bend. And I went down with my wife, and a priest brought us around campus in a golf cart. And it was an extraordinary experience. The campus has grown unbelievably. And I got to take a look at the campground of where this 17-year-old kid showed up. And I had the damnedest time trying to figure out how I ended up being such a schmuck in that environment, how I never had the experience that was being offered to me at a great university. But it was clear to me that sometime in my sophomore year, I turned from being a student and turned to my alcoholism. And I stopped going to class quite a bit my sophomore year, a whole bunch my junior year, and I didn't go to class at all in my senior year. And I walked out in the middle of my senior year. And I couldn't, if you asked me why, I could not give you an answer. All I can do is tell you is that I was an alcoholic kid, and I abandoned my family and friends and moved to the dark side. And that's what happened to me. And I woke up one day, and I went over to a priest. I resigned. I moved out. The priest said, God, just go to school tomorrow. I didn't even know where my classes were. I had no idea what, and I was due to be commissioned in the Army. I had to get a medical release. I got was for alcoholism. I was diagnosed an alcoholic when I was 18 years old. And can you imagine my parents in the middle of my senior year showing up with no warning and just saying I quit? Extraordinary. I bring that up for a number of reasons. One is I don't know that I'm going to give you many great insights into my walk in Alcoholics Anonymous. Number two, if we grabbed Mary Thayer and said, Mary, so she gets a birthday cake, and I don't know how many years it is. Is it 50 years, Mary? And you stand up and we say, tell us how you did it. Well, the fact is, Mary doesn't know. And we've seen this happen time and time again, where the person knows they don't know. And the reason they don't know is the knower is not who's doing the talking. The mind is in charge of the talking. And the mind does not know what happened in those 50 years, what happened My mind does not know what happened at Notre Dame when I was 17 years old. And it doesn't know in the way that you would expect me to know what has happened to me in my experience since I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous. I make an approximation of it, and I'm going to share it to the, I'm as honestly as I can and to talk about it. But it isn't intellectual knowing. It is spiritual knowing. And there's a very different center of that. And that's one of the reasons why many of us have trouble kind of explaining both our difficulties and our resolution to some of those difficulties in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because we go and try to understand them in the classic sense of the mind understanding it, and the mind cannot contain it. It's a knowing that at the shallowest level is probably intuitive, but it is at a level of consciousness. So all the changes that we have cumulatively in Alcoholics Anonymous happen to us because we've had a change of consciousness. We would not be able to have made the changes we have, understand them, put them into our life, and use them unless we had, which Chamberlain called a new pair of glasses, unless we had a new consciousness. And that is subconscious. That is not accessible in the classic sense to the mind. It is accessible to the knower. And we have a knower in each of us that is connected to our source. It's connected to the God of our understanding. But that knower is non-intellectual. And as a result, it's extremely hard to word kind of went out. So I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 23 years old. I had my last drink a week after my 24th birthday. I didn't have much of a life. I mean, my first, fourth, and fifth step was like a third grade art project my mom put on the refrigerator. I had heard about AA. Our family were friends with Pat Butler, whose family started Hazelwood. And my dad had talked to Pat about me, and even though I was pretty young, but diagnosed, as I say, at 18 years old as a drunk. So my dad wanted me to go to treatment. I just did not want to go to treatment. So now I'm home. I finished school. When I finished school, my father asked me to leave home. He said, "We love you, but we do not know what to do with it." I got a job at a liquor store. I worked 6 months at a liquor store. I got fired. I went and got a job as a waiter downtown Minneapolis. I'm living on Skid Row, $10 a night rooms. I'm shacked up with waiters and waitresses, people I work with during that. No one knew where I was, which was just fine. I was not living a very good life, and I was very unproud of what I was doing. And I had that job about 6 months, and I got in a fist fight, and I got beat up pretty bad. And I got fired as a waiter, and I went back and asked my family if I could move back in the house. They allowed me to move back in the house. At that time, I got back together with Linda. I got accepted into officer candidate school. I'm getting ready to go to Vietnam. They lose my file. They asked me to take the physical again. I take it for the fourth time. I fail the physical. So now I get engaged with Linda. I go get a real job rather than this sober job or whatever, or not sober job, drunk job. Bought my first car, and I thought, hey, I'm going to be a grown up. Only I couldn't quit drinking. Just before I went back to my senior year, I got into a compromising situation, and I got this crap beat out of me. I got pistol whipped. The guy put a bullet in the wall next to my head, threw me down at least one flight of stairs. And I ended up in a state of shock, and I ended up in the psych ward. And they were not going to let me go back to school my senior year. I talked my way out of that. They let me go back. And I didn't drink for a couple of months. And I thought I proved that everybody didn't tell me, but I got a drinking problem. Well, I just quit for 2 months, and I'm still a horse's ass. There's something else wrong with me. It's like a built-in failure mechanism. I'm as confused about what a horse's ass I am as you are confused who feel responsible for me and my family. And that's where I was. I had absolutely zero insight into what was going on. I was a full-fledged alcoholic. I'm drinking a fifth a day. Well, a pint to a fifth a day. So I get this new job and now I'm the company drunk. I was the class drunk at Notre Dame. They used my room as a study hall. I was never in it. Now I'm in a research department of a company, and I use up my sick leave in the first 2 months of work, and I'm sleeping off my hangovers in the dark room, and I'm in bed. When I went back to make amends to the guy who hired me, he said, "God, you interviewed so well." And I said, "Yeah, we do, but we have performance issues." So at any rate, I went and got a sales job, and I had that job a couple of months, and I went out on a 4-day drunk, and I woke up sometime in July of 1967, hugging the toilet, doing my morning exercises. And that was my moment. To explain how disgusted I was with myself would be hard to do. And I called Alcoholics Anonymous. I was given the opportunity to go to a restaurant and meet 2 guys. One guy had 5 months, one guy had 5 years. And they sat me down in a booth and they told me about AA. They said, "We're from AA. We've had a drinking problem, found an answer for it. Hope it helps you. If it doesn't help you, don't worry about it. It helps us talking to guys like you." And they told me their story. And in the telling of their story, they changed my life. I had talked to all sorts of experts, all the psychologists, psychiatrists, bishop, priests, nuns, lawyers, judges. I'd never talked to another person. I mean, the power of talking to another person who has lived the experience that you're talking about is life-changing. And I went to my first meeting, met my sponsor at my first meeting. You talk about luck. My sponsor was the 12-step champion of that group. He got sober in July of 1954. He was the Second World War vet, lost half his crew in a bomb disposal unit in Italy. And, he got sober, and he did an enormous amount of 12-step work, and I got to be his wingman. And his wife sponsored my wife and Elena. And that man, so I got exposed to a boatload of people who got sober in the late 40s and into the early and middle 50s. And those men were not fancy guys. At least in Minnesota, we didn't have too many people who were expert with the book in those days. I get a sense that maybe in California they did, and I get a sense that maybe in Texas they did. But they were the finest group of men and women that I have ever been exposed to this day. They were that special generation that Brokaw talked about in his book. They just were good, strong people. They knew right from wrong. Once they got sober, once they, developed a relationship with the God of their understanding, and it was attractive as hell. And I just felt blessed. They didn't give this 24-year-old kid a bad time about, I spilled more than you. They accepted me and welcomed me with open arms, and I found a home. My gift is I loved AA from the moment I walked in the door. And I became a very active member of Alcoholics. I drank twice after that, once on a business trip, once on our honeymoon. And I had my last drink December 10th on the airplane on the way home. So I gave up 3 or 4 months of sobriety on my honeymoon. And my wife, if I fail to mention this, I wouldn't be sober today, I don't believe, without my wife. She has been an unbelievable partner in my life. She's 55 years sober. 55 years in Al-Anon. And she's got a better program than I have. I have to climb mountains to find what I do. She has a natural spirituality, which is powerful, quiet, and has been the source of great stability in our home. I'm the loud one. So 55 years. I've lived a lifetime in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have, if I was trying to pick, significant things. So my first 7 or 8 years of sobriety were of a character that I'm going to have a hard time telling you exactly what it was. But my engagement with the steps and my program was external. I was doing the steps. I was doing the deal. I got the merit badges. I was giving talks. I was sponsoring people. I was everywhere. I was going to 5, 6, 7 meetings a week. People were not doing that in that day. Most of the people that I knew went to 1 or 2 meetings a week. They did a lot of 12-step work. So they went to other meetings when they were taking new drunks to it. But as a rule, they were members of, one particular squad, as we call them. And I never realized what a external orientation. It was kind of like working for a big corporation and kind of drinking the Kool-Aid and wanting to do everything. I mean, Alcoholics Anonymous was the most important thing in my life. All I wanted to do. I had, most of you have heard my talk. I mean, I had money problems because I spent more money than I made. I was an unhelpful husband. My wife's an RN. She's getting up at 6 o'clock. She's going to work. And she's, when we started to have kids, she's doing 90% of what the kids are doing. I am kind of the last of those Second World War guys. And I am not a helpful husband. And that was not attractive. It was not pretty, but I did not see it. I was so full of myself, and I was so, and Linda was so grateful. She didn't complain. I mean, she thought her husband's sober, and there were a hell of a lot of wives that were going to Al-Anon and so forth whose husbands were not sober. And I started talking early in AA. I guess I was sober I was given a lot of talks at treatment centers and other groups. And I gave my first conference talk probably when I was 6 or 7 years sober. And by the time I'm 8 years sober, I'm regularly shooting my mouth off different places and are sponsoring a lot of people. Around that time, Linda and I had, so you've heard my talk about when I did my third fifth step, my sponsor asked me to find a psychologist that works with business people because I have trouble with work, money, failure, success, and I got a psychologist I went to, and Linda and I went to it. He wanted to get Linda involved. I didn't want Linda involved. I didn't want people to know what a horse's ass I was at home. And around somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5 years, I can't remember anymore, I had a second surrender. Sometime around that time, my wife had a second surrender. My wife almost had a nervous breakdown. I had no idea. It scared the bejesus out of me that my inadequacy in supporting her helped bring her to a point where she was absolutely at the end of her rope. She just absolutely at the end of her rope and didn't know what to do. And she is a strong woman. She's a quiet woman, but she's a strong lady. And I started to realize what a horse's ass I was. The biggest problem I had is I was a really lousy worker. I had trouble getting to work, staying at work, and I had trouble working at work. I can't tell you what that is. I can tell you that God changed that, but I can't explain to you other than fear. When I went to that psychologist, he asked me, why are you so afraid of failing? And I wanted to strike him. That was the core. I had never, now you'd think with 3 inventories, a guy would have known about fear. Well, we weren't as good with the book, and fear had to do with snake dogs and tall buildings. And I'm afraid of being a husband. I'm afraid of being a worker. I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of success. I'm swimming in fear and did not recognize it or ever deal with it in any effective way. And after about 2 months with that psychologist, I went home. I had a really bad experience, and I got down on my knees, and I had a second surrender. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I had a wall built around me, thinking you like me, what I don't have to see about me. I tore the wall down, and I stood naked in front of what I thought my alcoholism was. At 8 years, I tore the wall down, and I stood naked in front of my life. And there were no dividers. There were no dividers between AA and my marriage, between AA and my finances, between AA and work, between AA and my kids. And I was given the opportunity to take the 6th and the 7th step in a life-changing way. 6th step said we're entirely ready to have God remove our defects of character. 7th step said we humbly ask him, we were shortcomings. I spent 8 years trying to get rid of them. My idea was, you get me sober, I'll learn how to work. You get me sober, I'll learn how to be a good husband. I was unable to do that of my own accord. And I didn't realize that prior to, I thought if I came in and I did the steps and I cooperated and I went to the meetings and I did the stuff, but sitting in a chicken coop doesn't make you chicken. And I looked pretty good. I had the merit badges. You would have predicted, and almost everybody did. They thought I was just a spectacular example of sobriety for a young person in Alcoholics Anonymous. And little did they know that my life was falling apart. And I went back through the steps for the third time. And my fourth and fifth step altered me. Around that same time, I ran into Bob White. I was at an AA conference in Hot Springs, Arkansas, talking at old granddad, and Bob White was there with Eddie Reagan and Alabama Carruthers. And I fell in love with Bob and Marceline White. It was like a handoff. Warren fundamentally gave me the foundation. And I needed to run into Bob White and the people that surrounded Bob White for the next chapter, not to leave Warren. I didn't leave Warren. Warren was my sponsor for the first 33 years of my life. And we were bonded. We were family. But they had a level of spirituality and a connection with the God of their understanding that was beyond. I could tell you a lot about God, but I did not have the relationship that they had. And they exposed me to Unity, to Science of the Mind Church, to Chuck Chamberlain, to, then I'm making friends with Chuck and Cecil and Marguerite and, just a whole bunch of people who had a spiritual program. Chuck Chamberlain took the communication in Alcoholics Anonymous prior to Chuck. Almost all talk for drunk alike. Started with your first drink, ended with your last, but the last 5 minutes talking about the wife, kids, and job. And he's and Cecil and Marguerite and a few people, like they started to turn the ship, and all of a sudden people were talking about the steps and recovery. And it took a while, and there were people that criticized those people very heavily for changing the communication in AA, but change it they did. And I think a third iteration of that has happened in the last 20, 25 years, where we are talking about problems in sobriety. People have been sober a hell of a long time, and they're tired of this deal. And then I got sober and life was just fine. They got sober and they're saying, now what? And they want to know about how you using the program for your marriage. Well, when I had that surrender at 8 years, my conditions and my protection altered. I tore down the wall. It didn't matter anymore what I wanted. I really started to turn my life over to the care of God at a level that I had not done it before. So the fact that I was afraid, I was a salesman who didn't make sales calls, tough shit. I was a guy who had to sit out in the parking lot and read the third step prayer, get out of my car, go on the call that I knew wouldn't work, and start doing that. And I became an effective salesperson. All of a sudden, the guy that, didn't like using computers started to use computers. And I was the guy who was analyzing the deals that we were selling. And I became effective. I don't know how, my mother always said, you're not very bright, Bob, dress well. And I've always been smart. I've just never been effective. And that's a really shitty combination. And something happened to me. I used to so I hired a woman to get me up at 5:30. I mean, give me a break. I was getting up at 9 before. And so I hired someone to get me up at 5:30. And I go to 6 o'clock mass on the weekday. And I'm at mass. After mass, I go to a side altar and I pray to God. I say, God, give me your mind. I don't know what to do. Bullshit. I knew what to do. I was not doing it. And you know what? He gave me his mind. And all of a sudden, the guy who wasn't able to do so many things in the work area and in the money area, I gave my wife the checkbook and I went on an allowance, $100 a week. I'm up to 200. She puts 200 out on the dresser every Friday. And but I started to date my wife every Friday night for 35 years. It was a real live, dangerous date. We were out talking about kids and bills, which is not how we fell in love. And I had to do the things that you would do if you had a new girlfriend, reestablish romance and the love connection in our relationship. And we did that. And it was the best thing we ever, it was the best thing we ever did for the kids. You know, I see people who sometimes give too much of themselves to their children and not enough to each other. And I had a good example in my own home that helped me set that relationship. So now I'm sober 8-10 years. My life takes off. I'm making a boatload of money. I'm now making, you know, up until 8 years, I was making, you know, 15, 20 grand a year. And I don't think I ever had a year after that, less than 100 grand. And my ego gets in the way. You know, I'm full of myself. I'm the guy driving up in a new Mercedes and a, you know, expensive suit, thinking that God had blessed me for what a wonderful AA I was. You would not have liked me in your group. There are problems with failure. There are problems with success. I was a dick, and I didn't know it. It just comes naturally. I have a gift for dictum, and so I had to learn, you know, so in the mid 80s, they changed the tax law and I lost everything I had. I lost the big house. I mean, I lost everything. I just could not believe, if any of you are praying to be a millionaire, include the idea of keeping it. It never occurred to me that if I ever became a millionaire, that I'd lose it. I lost it all. I lost more than I had. And that was not like changing my clothes. It was like tearing the skin off my body. And I think in every very difficult situation in life, there's a lesson. And I don't think God had the real estate collapse. It was the largest real estate collapse since the Great Depression. I don't think God had the collapse to teach me that lesson, but the lesson for me in that was to find out who I was with money and who I was without money, and to find out the importance of it. Money has always been too important to me. I still struggle with that. It is, I don't think you make a lot of money, and I make a lot of money, if money isn't probably more important than it should be. So it's out of balance, but it doesn't have, I don't think, I'm more imbalanced, I think, than I have ever been. The things where we leak, the money spending, anger, work, wealth, the places that we leak, I think we still have a tendency throughout our life to still leak in those areas. And we have to have at least an eye kind of cocked in our inventory to be able to take a look at whether or not that's going on. So in 1986, you know, I sold the Mercedes and I bought a 8-year-old Buick, and mine was on an allowance, and it was pretty tough. It was our middle boy by this time is our oldest boy is sober. Our middle boy came home, got drunk, arrested for drunken driving, got, you know, ended up in treatment at Hazelden. And, you know, I'm going to a meeting at the halfway house, and the meeting starts and I cry all the way through the meeting. You know, how'd you like to be that guy? You know, how'd you like to have what he has? You know, I think he's got the clap. I was just suffering at every level. And I think there's no place better to pick yourself up from a very difficult situation than Alcoholics Anonymous. I remember I'm at a party with Jerry Jones out of Texas, and I'm explaining to this guy. So if you ever happen to ask me any question, I would get into this about how I'm going broke. And I'm into this deeply conversation. The guy looked at me, he said, "Yeah, that first time's a bitch." And I looked at him, and he was in the oil business. And of course, he'd been through about 3 ups and downs. You know, I was thinking this was, you know, I'm not going to survive this one. This will never happen again. Of course, I damn near did it again in 2008. Explaining to your wife that you're in serious financial trouble again is harder than explaining that you're in serious financial trouble the first time. I will share that with you. So I don't know. I guess I have surrounded myself with active members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've surrounded myself with people who are doing the deal. Those are the people that I know more about who I am on this screen than I do anyplace else in my life. I really did not, I identified as a businessman and I liked making money. But my real identity was as a recovered alcoholic and a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that 7 or 8 years where I was a lousy worker allowed me to build a foundation that was to save my ass when things got better and to save my ass specifically when I went broke. And I'm so glad that I had that foundation. I never stopped going to AA. I never stopped working with my sponsor. You know, my wife's partnership in the steps and the program was really important. The idea of using the principles in all our affairs. The only other thing I can say is, I say almost going broke twice were pretty big adjustments. And today my son runs a company. I retired day to day about 5 or 7 years ago. And I'm still involved financially, but I'm not involved at the office. I can't figure out, when they built the new office, they didn't build me an office. And I don't know if there's a message in that. And they're doing about 4 times as much business as we ever did. And I don't know if that's related to my leaving, but maybe. One of the biggest ongoing problems I had was with our middle son. My middle son is more like me than, we have 3 boys. And they're, I don't know how old they are, 50, 54, 51, and 41, I think, something like that. I know their names. And they're all good men. At one time, they were all in AA. The youngest one is back smoking a little dope, but he's a good kid. And the other 2 are sober 34 and 31 years, I think. And it's just magnificent. But the middle son was problematic. He went to 5 colleges. He had, his story, he was just a horse's ass during those early years. And then he straightened himself out. He got into Alcoholics Anonymous, and he got a master's from Oxford University in England, and he got a master's from Harvard, and the World Economic Forum made him a young global leader. But even during that time, he would get, we had to take care of a couple of financial issues that were, 50, 60, 70,000 bucks. We had issues, and I was inappropriate, and I was angry, and I was sometimes physical, and I was deeply ashamed of it. And it was a pattern that my father and I had. My father was my hero without question. And, but my father was very physical with me. And when I would get kind of at the end of my rope, I would get physical with my son. And I did a lot of work, with different psychologists in the thing. And I did a number of inventories. And the last couple of inventories I did were with Howard Polans, when Howard was my sponsor. And I report this to you that I'm a guy who at this time was sober 40 years, 35 years. And I can't handle it. It is beyond my ability to handle what is going on. I have made amends to my son. The behavior is gone, but we get in conversations, and within 5 minutes, we're nose to nose. And it is just, we love each other, but we know, there's something wrong. And the time before last that I went through this, and I did an amend, and I really think I got as close as I ever had up till that time of dealing with it. And it still wasn't done. And the last time I was able to put a nail in this thing had to do with forgiveness. I had to forgive every single episode. I had to let go of, there was something about, because I had because my wife and I had spent such enormous amounts of money trying to straighten this thing out, somehow that gave I don't know if it gave me the right to judge. You know, I had to give up judging. I had to give up judging, and I had to forgive every single episode. And my son is very, very lovable. I love my son as deeply as I have, but I'm sharing this with you that this followed me into my sobriety and was not a small problem. And it wasn't a problem that I didn't attend to. I attended to it, and I wasn't up to it. And the power of surrender is one of the greatest powers. It'd be hard for me to explain. And today I had the joy. I was just up at the lake, and I got my wife's up there right now with Peter. And today we're clear. And may we always be clear. It is, neither of us have a commitment. He doesn't seem to have a commitment to blame me for my intolerable behavior during that process, my abuse. And we have a relationship that I would put up, that's very, very much what I've always hoped for. And it's been easier for me to have that relationship with our other two kids, but it's been hard. You'd think a child that is most like you would be the easiest to deal with. And I think because I've been so hard on myself, I judged him much more harshly than I did the others. So I don't know. I just turned 79. I can't believe the numbers. I just absolutely can't believe them. I'm not as good with new guys. We spent 3 or 4 months in Mexico, and I'm gone a lot of weekends, so I haven't been sponsoring many new people, and I feel a little anxious about that. And I don't feel, feels good. I think my strength is, and what I try to do with the people that I sponsor is bring the principles into the conversations that we're having. I don't, when Bill wrote that letter, both the letter to Barker and wrote the letter to us in spiritual sobriety, and when Bob Pearson wrote the letter about rigidity in AA, I think as we get older, and most of the people on the screen are older, it isn't about doing it perfectly, and it isn't about doing it just one way. It isn't about orthodoxy. Most of us, if we have, I forget, I was at a meeting this morning, or maybe it was last night, and the guy read Dr. Bob's letter on humility from his desk. And it's just so wonderful. It's one of the great letters. I want to get a copy of it again. I think I had it and lost it. But as I get older, humility, I'm tired of me. I'm tired of my AA talk. I don't like giving it. I don't like listening to it. It is, and yet, even though I talk about the first phase of my sobriety, a second surrender is an experience that many of us need to face today. There are those of us that every once in a while are on a screen like this, and we're having an issue that if we don't solve, we're not going to stay married. If we don't solve, we're not going to, we're going to screw up our finances or lose our job or do something. And the great tool of inventory, and to be able to have the humility to be able to, so as you get older, you're just less important. People look through you. They don't, I'm at the stage now where I'm one of those see-through people. I'm loud, so once in a while they have to pay attention. But that is, I think, a God-given experience, that it isn't as what I think is not important. I walk into a room like I did 2 days ago, and they're having a development meeting with my son and the 5 or 6 or 7 people in the development team, and they're all, high 20s to 50 years of age, and they think different. They're smart as a whip. They give me some deference, but I am unnecessary to the meeting. I don't really have anything particularly important enough that it would be necessary for me to share it. And as a result of that, I find myself more than I ever have not sharing. And it isn't out of reluctance, and it isn't out of, I'll show you or whatever the hell it is. It's out of that I love you just the way you are. I'm able to be with you just the way you are. My input is not necessary in any way to who you are and what you're doing. And most of the time, I would say that I'm able to do that a surprising amount of time. And I would like to be, from a spiritual standpoint, I'd like to be done with me. It isn't that I'm going to go down to Mexico with my wife. It isn't that I don't have things that I like to do and objects that I enjoy. I do. But I'd like to be done with me. I am less reactive than I've ever been in my life. And I still have days. I was at a car dealership and I got treated poorly and I kind of shut down. And I haven't had a day like that where I just kind of closed my eyes and stopped talking. I mean, I felt like I was being abused almost. I haven't had a day like that in a long, long time. Most of the time, and I could afford whatever I was being screwed out of. I could afford, but I really, really did not like the experience. But I very seldom ever get to a place where I feel like I'm being abused. If someone's abusing me, it's because they're having a bad day. It's because there's something going on with them, and it doesn't necessarily mean, and there may be something that I need to pay attention to in the process. We have been given the keys to the kingdom. We've been given the tools. I mean, the fact, when you take the steps and say the first 3 steps are to give up, 4 and 5 are to own up, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are to clean up, and 10, 11, and 12 are to grow up. The order and strength and perfection of the steps. And as we grow in the program, the steps are not something they do. It's almost like they do us. It's almost as if they become part of the pattern of our psyche. They become part of literally the very cloth of our consciousness. And we find ourselves with great regularity. I love when it talks about when in 60, in step 11 in the book, when it talks about, if we keep asking in the morning for, pray for insight and all this sort of stuff, that we will find ourselves intuitively knowing what to do. Now, we won't, that not all the time, but it'll become a regular pattern in our life we come to rely on. And I'll tell you, the people that I admire in Alcoholics Anonymous, when I'm having a situation and I call up Steve Lee, or I call up Rob Hamilton, or I call up, one of my sponsees, between the two of us, it's very seldom that you ever run into something that you can't have a conversation about and walk away feeling like you know what direction to move in. Now think of that. Anything, children problems, health problems, sex problems, money problems, anything. And I feel like I have been given a program that allows me to, as we talk about, live life on life's terms. I'm so overpaid that it's just silly. And we aren't exempt from life, and we are going to have, from time to time, very serious things, health problems. I had open heart surgery 3 years ago, but it's like a pimple on it's just nothing in the deal. And the other thing about me that I discovered is I'm a guy who lives his life in partnership. At 50, we just celebrated 50 years in the company. I've been partners with my business partner's got 59 years of sobriety. We've been partners 52 or 3 years, and we're very different. When we used to fight a lot, but I have long-term relationships. The blessing to look at the screen, and the blessing to look at the meetings that I go to, and have the relationships with you. is really nice. God bless you and thank you for all you've brought into my life.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on tonight. I do think that you have a total gift for dictum and are one of the coolest guys I've met in a long time. Hey, one of the things that it was so fun. I think I first got exposed to you in 2008 at the Usual Suspects workshop, and I like to go sit on the back porch and listen to you and Kevin talk and smoke cigars. And one of my favorite stories that you used to talk about was some of your experiences you had with Chuck C.
Yep.
And you had and you told that story about the time that he said you already are everything you're ever going to be. Mm-hmm. And I think it was in 2008 that you gave that workshop or that Saturday morning talk on that the process of spiritual growth is a process of subtraction and not addition. And I think that was one of the most powerful. Yeah.
But if we grab each other and ask, are you different? The fact is not so much. The program has taken us, and our God has taken us to a place we have always been. He has taken us to a place where we are our true self, not our false self, not our ego, not our personality. He's taken us to the grounded spirituality that we have. And that's why we have a sense of ease and comfort today. And it's like coming home. And it is not as a result of doing anything. It's a result of shutting things.
Yeah, I love that talk. And so we have, the way that we usually do this is we have you call on a couple people and then we'll open it up. So you just play musical squares, call on a couple of people, and then we'll open it up. Is that okay with you?
No, you call.
You want me to do it? Okay.
Yep.
All right, hang on.
Tom wants to talk.
What about Tom?
Bob, thanks so much. I love listening to you, and I'm right with you. And, I'm right there. I wanted to ask, years ago, I don't know how many years ago, but it seems like a long time ago, that you made a statement. I don't know if it was at a conference or a tape I heard, but you said, speaking of depression, that depression's, the reason for depression is to grind the ego down. And I never heard anybody else say that. And I wondered if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, the ego. So first of all, the depression that I suffer is minor compared to the serious depression that I see some people have. So I want to report that I'm not talking about the most serious brands of depression. But when Dowling met Bill, Bill is complaining about his depression. And he says, is it ever going to end? And Dowling said, I don't think so. He said, I think you have divine discomfort. Mm-hmm. And I think so I've had a spiritual advisor most of my sobriety. I had one for 35 years and I just asked another. And by the way, my sponsor has 20 years less sobriety than I have, 25. And my spiritual advisor has less time considerably than I have. If you're going to live a long time, we need to find people who are journeymen, not with 3 or 4 years, but maybe with 20 years. We do not have to find someone necessarily with more time, physical time. But I really do think that people talk about depression and problems in their lives as being the turning point and the teaching points. And why it's so important is that it does grind the ego to dust. Pain, the suffering that we put ourselves through, reduces the ego. And when the ego gets reduced, we're able to stand in front of stuff that we protect when our ego's intact. And we think we don't have to do it. So it is, I really think there's a spiritual benefit to the suffering that we go through. And suffering is a very important part of growth.
I'd like to call on Gary, just while the night's still kind of early. Wanted to see if Gary would like to share.
I don't want to talk to Gary.
I don't blame you. It's just
Tough. I was just here at the end here, and that I've been reminiscing a little bit. You and I met in Houston, if I remember.
Young People's International.
Young People's International, right? Yeah, and I it's kind of great because I thought you were crazier than hell then, and we had some interesting things there that have happened with the two of us, and I was kind of bouncing back and forth with some of our experiences together, and with that, and it's just been enjoyable for me. I just really enjoyed everything about that. I'm sitting here looking at so many of our friends here on this screen right here now, and a couple of them here live here in town and call me sponsor, and that's a joke. I use them. That seems to be the work.
Yep.
Better than that, and that God, it's sure just good to hear from you, my friend, and hope we can do it again sooner than later.
Thanks, Gary.
Diane, I think you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you, Bob, for your share. My name is Diane. I'm an alcoholic. I couldn't quite hear that fast when you were talking about the steps and the show up, give up, throw up. Would you go through that?
First 3 steps are to give up. 4 and 5 are to own up.
Oh, no.
6, 7, 8, and 9 are to clean up. And 10, 11, and 12 are to grow up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. My cup runneth over.
I think that's actually in Al-Anon literature, one of the books.
Okay.
Nice.
Thank you.
What about Darren from Australia? Would you like to share?
Hey friends, I'm Darren. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Darren.
Bob, so good to hear you as always. It's been really nice to sit and listen. We're actually packing our bags. Been here in Minnesota for how many days? 5 or 6 days. Visiting Bob, and it's been just a real joy to be here local and spend some time. And yeah, great to see lots of friendly faces online as well. And God bless.
Thank you. And what about Chris R? Would you like to share? Oh, he might have jumped off. Anybody you'd like to share now? We'll just open it up. Please raise your hands.
Rob Hamilton.
Rob Hamilton.
Thanks, Bob. I love you, my friend. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Rob. You know, I've known Bob for a long time, and like a lot of you guys in this room, I've heard Bob tell his story a lot of times. And Bob, tonight you moved me to tears. I love everything you say. I enjoy every minute I get to spend with you. My sponsor, when I told him how much time I was spending with Bob, he knew Bob way back when. And he said, really? And I politely explained to him that the Bob we have with us today isn't the Bob that you knew 30, 40 years ago. You helped so many people, myself included, and I'll be forever grateful for the day I met you. I love you, my friend.
What about Missy Donahue?
Well, hi there. Hey,
Hey.
Bob, my name's Missy and I am an alcoholic. I was just thinking if I spoke this evening, I would tell you that just about everything I heard from you tonight, I could identify with. I came home from college at the age of 17, told my parents I was finished because they had thrown me out. I hadn't told them that part yet. And I got married about 2 weeks later and divorced 2 years after that. And the journey began. It was just amazing that I can sit here tonight and realize that every single thing I went through as a small child, adolescent, teenager, young woman, until I hit, really literally tumbled into AA through the grace of God, was necessary. And I loved what you said. And I love about the knower. I always had a knower. I just never knew that. So thank you so much. It was wonderful. I've heard a lot about you from my old pal, Mary Thayer up there. She told me I should tune in tonight, and I'm glad I did. Thank you.
What
Go
about
on,
Mary?
Mary.
Hey, Mary. Still muted.
Me?
Yeah, yeah.
Mary Thayer, alcoholic. I couldn't wait to hear you. And I was taking little notes because I too, you were quicker than I was. I had that external sobriety going a lot longer, the intellectual, for about 20 years, unfortunately, until I finally realized what's going on with me. I'm so frightened. I don't understand. And the shift happened for me when I really looked at not God as I understand God. I didn't even understand God. I just didn't have any connection to churches or anything. In fact, the only thing that kept me, I think, sober is that I had actually run into something called the Invisible Ministry, which was Emmett Fox stuff down in La Jolla when I was first sobered up, that saved me. That's all I can say. And that it seemed as though when I came into AA, people were talking like what I had read about Emmett Fox and stuff. But as the years went on, and the people I loved, and they're all the people you and I know, which we had the blessing to speak at that, whatever that thing Jay had us speak at in Sedona. And I realized I had there was one man that used to come when I was newly sober. He was told he had 3 years to live. And he came out of where Bob lived. And he had an RV and he'd come to North Hollywood, Radford with Alabama Carruthers. And his name was Bill Musser. And he
I spent hundreds of hours with Bill Musser.
And when you told me that, I said, no wonder I've always just followed you, or, whatever you're doing. But Bill used to say to me, you work these steps poorly until you learn to work them well. If you wait until you do them perfectly, you'll never do them at all. And that was one of the gifts. Plus, I was new, I was young. You used to say, you love someone that much, don't give someone anybody as sick as you are. That was, we're always involved with a feather if it floated by. Anyhow, I agree with you. I became aware of this knower or observer, and things started to shift. And I realized for myself, it's been more the God of my experience, not my understanding. And if I could, and I think it was either Mike Ross or somebody would say, if you can define God, you'd be God. So stop trying to define it. And little things like that started to work for me. I also feel I didn't really hear that we're to practice these principles in all of our affairs. I kept thinking, just do a step, just do it. And I had no idea what spiritual principles were. And as I've grown in this program and see it, that line that says elimination of our drinking is but a beginning, a better demonstration of that is in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. I never liked the fact that it said homes first, because I was an awful mother. I too, trouble is that she didn't have anybody but me, as a mother. And to work on that issue and to admit the surrender of admitting that I was a terrible mother, that first step of surrender is so necessary, not just for alcohol, but for any one of these defects in our character that we realize. And to me, they were all driven, just as you were talking about, of fear, no faith. My defects of character today are still fear. If I have anything where I feel as though I'm not in a place of neutrality, it's like, where's the fear? I'm now more curious than
My fear underneath is I always thought God wanted me poor and happy.
Yeah.
And I had to walk away from that. And it has been I have less worry about what God would have me be than I ever have up until now.
And I feel as though the longer I'm around, of course, the longer I really don't know. I call myself a seasoned beginner. And when you were saying you're trying to not be something, did you see, I'm sure you did, Ram Dass's last film, Becoming Nobody? Oh, it's called Becoming Nobody. And I have experienced what you're saying. I'd rather somehow, I don't know what it is. It's not that I don't want to be there for people, but it's not about me. I've been saying it about, I don't know, the last 5 years or so. I don't think this is about me at all. It is about something so much greater. And you are a demonstration of that. And I'm honored to know you and have met your beautiful wife. And thank you for tonight.
Thank you.
I believe Nancy had her hand up. Nancy, would you like to share?
Thanks for letting me speak right after Mary Thayer. Big help. But I'm Nancy and I'm an alcoholic and a grateful member of AA and a really active member. And I don't know if I have the words to say what I want to say, but I just love, I felt so inspired, and encouraged, and it made me think about all the things that you said and that underlying fear that kind of works its way through my life that I try to let go of. And, the meditation of trying to, trust and rely on God. No, I'm too busy. I'm thinking of something else. And I was delighted and thrilled to hear you, and not because I think you're perfect, although you might be, but because I'm pretty sure you're not, and you're still working it. And you said something, and I think you were talking about your business, about walking into that room and feeling like you had nothing to add. And I just want to say that I needed to hear what you had to say tonight. So thank you.
Thank you so much. What about Jimmy from New Jersey? Oh, Jimmy might have left the room for a minute. What about Olaf?
Hi, everybody. My name's Olaf. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks so much, Bob. Boy, oh boy, you've seen a lot, you've experienced a lot, and you've done a whole lot. Thanks so much for sharing your experience with us tonight. Thanks for letting me be here.
Bob, one thing I wanted to ask while I still had you was I found a lot of the workshops and listened to a lot of the workshops you did with Sandy B. And one of the really cool, and I think that if I'm not mistaken, I think that he didn't want to do I think you were the only guy he would do workshops with for a long time. And I wonder if you talk a little bit about, he's just such a fascinating character. And I wonder if you talk a little bit about that relationship and how that kind of started, and about some of the stuff you learned in that.
We know each other, I've been exposed to Sandy since I was new in AA. Sandy had a few years on me, but it was really the last 20 years where we came together in a way. Sandy hit a different gear. Sandy's always one of the best communicators we had in Alcoholics Anonymous. He didn't like me saying this or anybody else saying it, but he became our Chamberlain the last 10 years of his life, minus the last two. The last two, he was in too much pain, and he wasn't able to be his full self. I got to be his wingman. I find that in my life, I make a better number two guy than I do a number one guy. And I never enjoyed anything as much as the interaction with him that we had. He brought the best out in me, and I felt privileged to be. He had a gift of story, and because you can't speak about God and speak about spiritual matters in the mind. The mind wants to understand it, and the mind wants to describe it, but the mind can't contain it. So we have to do it with stories. Well, all the old guys in AA and the old gals in AA were storytellers. If you got Chamberlain in a room, or you got Chamberlain and Bob White were the two strongest men in a room with 30 people that I've ever been with. And it was all stories. It was just, and all the drunkalogs. When those people got done with their drunkalog, if you could hear the music, if you could hear the story, it's the story of Christmas. I mean, we are like little kids sitting at our parents' feet. And if they leave part of the story out, we remind them they left something out. They have to go back and retell it. I mean, we're talking about a miracle. It is just, and Sandy was deceptively studious. He significantly prepared for things, and he made it look like he didn't prepare. And he had a gift, the likes of which, very, very, very few of us had. And I think spiritual organizations, of which we are one, we have people that we honor in that way. Chamberlain, without question, was in that way. Max Sheeter was kind of in that way for a lot of us who may not have known who Mac was. And we recognize people that are a little further down the road than we are. And every opportunity we get, we come to listen to them because they spur something in us. They create an opening with their wisdom, with their truth. And our knower has never heard it before, and it knows without question that it just heard something important, and it was meant for them. And we take that inside, and he did that more often for me, and I think for most of us, than anybody I've ever seen.
And he had that gift of just reducing stuff to its simplest element, just taking something extremely complex.
Yeah, but that's what genius does. Genius can take the complicated and the complex and say it simply, and that looks like it's simple. It is what it is brilliant.
I think one of the other questions I had for you was, what are some of the outside literature that you've enjoyed reading? Some that's been pretty influential to you. I know you turned me on to Anthony DeMello, Awareness, Richard Rohr.
I think DeMello is deceptively wonderful. I think Eckhart Tolle is today. Richard Rohr is one of Rohr's last books, The Universal Christ, I think is one of the best he's a courageous guy. And there's some things in the Universal Christ that I think people of Christian belief is illuminating to them. I read 25 meditation books a day, and 3 or 4 of them are Buddhist. There's a couple of what's the I'm having a senior moment, but the one that was given by God to listen to, and it's
God calling.
God. No, it's at any rate, about a third of them are AA, and about a third of them are Christian in nature, and Buddhist, and and because I read enough of them, I don't read them to get them out of the way, and somewhere in the reading of them, I am connected, and I don't. It connects me. I can't escape it, and that has, that connects with my knower. We really have a knower, and you can sit in a meeting and hear something that your soul goes, "Oh yeah." Well, it's never heard it before. How the hell does it know? It just knows. And that's not your intellect.
Yeah, I remember I was standing outside. I think I was younger, a couple years sober, and I just kind of gotten exposed to you, and I ran into, I started doing all this diarrhea of the brain questions on you about stuff. And you just looked at me like, I don't want to talk to your brain anymore. Good night. And I was like, God, this guy is either the biggest asshole I've ever met, or he's like I just can't get enough of it. Because every time I was around you, I'd be like, oh, just, like a tuning fork in my soul when you spoke. So I really appreciate you and love you and really appreciate everything you've done for us, man. Thank you so much for tonight. And I tell you, I had this situation where, I started this. I was a few guys in my basement, a workshop for the guys I sponsor, and then COVID hit, and we did a little, we opened it up for Zoom, and then opened it up and made it co-ed. And one of the things I thought would be, wouldn't that be a blast if I could get, these people to speak on this? And the last one that I had in my list that I hadn't gotten was you. So I appreciate you coming on tonight. It's meant a whole lot to me. And I believe Bill L has his hand up, and then we'll shut her down. Or Twyla after that.
Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate it. I had the pleasure of meeting you several times when you came to Tampa to speak with Sandy. And I came to this meeting tonight because I've been asked to give the talk on emotional sobriety in a couple of weeks, and I thought maybe I could, use the cliff notes and have something to take. And the truth of the matter is I have no more idea what I'm going to say now than I did before this meeting.
I understand.
But the thing that really touched me tonight is you're talking about the knower. And I got sober in Akron in 1978. And right from the beginning, I knew there was something significantly different about some of the old timers there. I didn't know what it was. There was just something. Today, I might be able to even perceive a glow. Back then, I couldn't, but there was just something different. And it seemed to take them 20 or 25 years to get it. And not all of them had it. And somebody explained to me, they said, we have old timers that have 20 years, and we have old people that have 1 year 20 times. And there's a significant difference. There's something about those of us that seek a spiritual path, usually out of necessity. Certainly in my case, it's never been out of any virtue. It's when I'm backed into a corner. And a couple of the common things, and you touch on this in your own way, was they were all seekers outside of AA as well. I was encouraged to find spiritual connection and teachers outside of AA right from the beginning. And I did, and they directed me to things to read and places to go. One of the places I was directed to was Unity. And I've been a member of Unity for 40 years. And Unity is a place for a spiritual tourist, so to speak, that seem to need more, or at least hear it in different ways in order for it to sink in. And I love the way that you talk about that. And if one of the things that I've lost, then I'll shut up. One of the big things I think we've lost with our newcomers is this idea that we need to be continuously seeking, and it isn't all within the four walls of a meeting room. You know, we need to expand our spirituality. The big book talks about it. We need to expand our spirituality, or I think we shrivel up and die. I really do. And I love it. And I wish you could say it one more time. You described depression again. You did it in one sentence. And I didn't write it down. If you could give me that one more time. Depression is the ego's, how did you say it?
It grinds the ego to dust is what we.
Grinds the ego to dust. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Anyway, I'm very grateful to have been here tonight, even though you gave me nothing to say, you know, when I have to speak in 2 weeks. But
Nobody knows what to say on this subject. Everybody, when I ask them to talk, they're like, what the hell do you want me to do? And I'm like, just have fun with it, man. You know, just let the spirit move you. Some people tell their story, but you know what? We have a shit ton of great tapes. Some of the best stuff I've ever heard has come out of people just starting off on this. And this was a great talk. This is one of the best. This is beautiful for me, and I really appreciated it. So, Bob, thank you so much. And are there any final thoughts? Anything you could think of that you know? Okay. Well, the way we usually shut this off is we mute ourselves, and then we go to our inner room and say the Lord's Prayer or a prayer of your choosing.